The question of what are the interests of each country are key. There's not a country participating in this war, in this so-called coalition. We don't need a coalition of the killing, that's what we've had in the past. We need a coalition of the rebuilding. But all of the interests of these governments is not in protecting their proxies, whether it's in Syria or in Iraq or anywhere else, in Afghanistan. It's to maintain their own power. That's true of the US, that's true of the Russians, it's true of the Iranians, it's true of the Saudis. Their human rights violations at home pale before what they're doing or allowing or encouraging their proxies to do in these wars. So this is what we need to be looking at. Now I have, and in the book is done as frequently asked questions. So one of the last questions is, so what should the policy be when a group like ISIS is so violent? Don't you need some kind of military? The problem is how violent they are doesn't tell you what's going to work to destroy them, what's going to work to undermine their influence and their power. What we've seen is that going to war against them encourages their power. It makes it greater, not less. It's not working. We need to do something different. I outline an 8 or 9 or 10-part policy of what the U.S. policy should look like. We can talk about that during the question period. But the final point I want to make, and this is also the last question in the book, is what do we do as people? What do we do as a movement? It's not enough to say, stop the bad stuff that we're doing that's making everything worse. We start, what should the policy be? Start with the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. Stop killing more people. Stop the bombing, stop the drones, stop the attacks. You're killing more people, not less. So stop that. But then, it's not enough to say, pull out the troops, pull out the bombers. We have to talk about what is our obligation as citizens of the country that has become this empire that is fighting to dominate this region. We have a lot of work to do. And it means education, it means advocacy, it means mobilizing opposition. It's not easy. It's not easy. What we've seen is that people in large numbers are often not prepared to fight against US wars unless there are US casualties in large numbers. And the strategy of the Obama war is to avoid US casualties at all costs. So when you make it into a drone war, you make it into a special ops war, you make it into an airstrike war, you're not having a lot of US casualties. There's still a few happening in Afghanistan because there's still 10,000 troops on the ground. But in large numbers, no. And so people are not prepared at a moment of crisis, economic crisis, political crisis, and fear. When fear takes hold, and we're seeing this in these election run-ups right now more than anything else, at that moment it's very hard to convince people that they should be worried about what US bombers are doing across the earth, where they're not killing Americans. That's our challenge. But it hasn't changed. The fact that ISIS is now one of the parties on the ground, you know, we heard a year and a half ago, we have to go after the regime in Syria because it's the worst thing that ever existed anywhere. It's a terrible regime. The US has relied on it for torture and for maintaining the Golan Heights, etc. But it's a terrible regime. But do we really think that militarily going after that regime is going to do better, like Iraq? But we have to get beyond the notion that we have no obligation to people that are struggling for freedom and liberation. We have huge obligations, but they don't include militarization and occupation. We have to be the creative ones to figure out, how do we reach other people? How do we do that education? How do we do that advocacy? How do we do the mobilization work, the protest work? How do we get people to engage and recognize that it is all of us? None of us are free until all of us are free. And that's an international reality. It's not just here. Thank you.